Every day ended the same way. The light faded. Shadows stretched across the ground. One by one, the colors disappeared until the forest became little more than dark shapes against an even darker sky. Nothing about the land had changed. The same trees were still standing. The same rocks still marked the path home. The same river still flowed through the valley. Yet suddenly, everything felt different. A place that seemed familiar an hour earlier could now make even experienced hunters hesitate. The ground was harder to read. Landmarks disappeared into the darkness. Sounds carried much farther than they did during the day. A branch snapping somewhere beyond the trees could mean almost anything. Nobody wanted to find out. For most animals, night was the beginning of their day. Owls woke up. Hyenas began searching for food. Big cats that had spent the afternoon resting quietly became active again. The balance of the world shifted with the setting sun. Humans knew that better than anyone. They weren't the strongest hunters after dark. They weren't the fastest. And unlike today, there were no streetlights waiting beyond the trees. So what happened every evening? Did people simply crawl into a cave and fall asleep? Or was the night just as important as everything they did under the sun? Because long before cities, long before electricity, and long before anyone owned a clock, every human life followed the same rhythm. The sun disappeared, and an entirely different world woke up. When the fire came alive, the day didn't end. It simply became smaller. The circle of light only reached a few meters in every direction. Beyond it, the forest disappeared into darkness. Nobody needed to see farther than that. Everything important had already gathered close. The children, the hunters, the older members of the group. Even the dogs, much later in human history, often settled near the warmth. The fire wasn't just there to keep people warm. It bought them time. Time they never had while the sun was up. Daylight belonged to survival. If you wanted food, you hunted. If you needed water, you collected it before dark. If a spear broke, there wasn't much choice, except to keep going until the work was finished. Night was different. Nobody expected a hunting party to leave after sunset. The risks were too high, and there was almost nothing to gain. That left people with something surprisingly rare. Hours that didn't belong to the next meal. A stone blade could finally be repaired without worrying that daylight was slipping away. Animal hides could be scraped a little longer. Someone twisted plant fibers into cord, while another carefully sharpened the point of a spear that had chipped earlier in the day. None of these jobs needed to be finished immediately. Tomorrow would still come. The fire simply made tomorrow a little easier. That quiet work happened while the flames cracked in front of them. Outside the firelight, the forest carried on without them. Eventually, the work ran out. The spear had been repaired. The hides were folded away. The last piece of wood was pushed into the fire. Nobody rushed to sleep. There wasn't much reason to. The flames still burned. The people everyone depended on during the day slowly became something else at night. The hunter who had spent the afternoon tracking deer was now laughing at a story he'd probably told dozens of times before. Someone interrupted to argue that it hadn't happened that way. The children believed whichever version sounded better. An older woman reached over and corrected a young boy's grip as he copied the way she tied a knot. She didn't stop the conversation. She simply kept talking while her hands showed him what words couldn't. Knowledge often moved that way, not as a lesson, just as part of another evening. Someone nearby noticed sparks drifting into the air. A child tried to catch one. Everyone laughed before an older voice reminded them to stay back from the flames. Moments like that rarely leave behind evidence. Nobody carves them into stone. Archaeologists don't uncover jokes buried beneath the ground. They don't find conversations. They don't discover the stories people told after dinner. Yet those ordinary evenings probably happened far more often than the dramatic moments we usually imagine. History remembers the hunt. Life was everything that happened after it. The fire didn't make the forest safe. It only made a small piece of it belong to humans. A few steps beyond the light, the darkness took over again. Nobody could see very far. The trees swallowed almost everything. Only the sounds remained. Some were familiar. Wind moving through leaves, water flowing over rocks, insects filling the silence between conversations. Others made people stop talking. A distant howl. Heavy footsteps somewhere beyond the trees. Branches breaking when nobody in the camp was moving. Most nights, nothing happened. That didn't make people careless. The danger wasn't something they expected every evening. It was something they knew could happen on any evening. That's a very different way to live. Archaeological sites show that many prehistoric camps were built with practical advantages in mind. Some overlooked open ground. Others rested beneath rock shelters or against cliffs that reduced the directions an animal could approach from. People weren't choosing places at random. They were choosing places that made the night a little more predictable. Even then, the fire had limits. It couldn't light the entire valley. It couldn't stop every predator. It couldn't guarantee that tomorrow would arrive peacefully. What it offered was enough light for a family to see one another, enough warmth to stay through the night, enough confidence that most evenings would end the same way they began, together. When the flames finally burned low, conversation faded with them. One by one, people lay down beside the people they knew best. Beyond the last glowing ember, the rest of the world carried on in the dark. The fire grows smaller. Tomorrow's hunt will begin long before the sun climbs over the trees. People settle into places they've probably slept 100 times before. A child rolls closer to a parent without waking up. Someone quietly pulls an animal skin over their shoulders as the night air grows colder. The camp becomes silent, not completely. Someone coughs. A baby stirs for a moment before falling asleep again. The fire cracks one last time. Then even that sound becomes rare. Outside the circle of light, the forest never really sleeps. Some animals are only beginning their day. Others are still searching for food beneath the stars. By sunrise, many of them will disappear again, leaving behind little more than footprints in the mud. The people sleeping beside the fire won't see any of it. When the first light reaches the trees, the camp slowly comes back to life. The same people who laughed together only a few hours earlier stand up, collect their tools, and begin another day. That rhythm repeated itself for thousands of generations. Not every evening changed history. Most didn't. Most evenings ended exactly like this one. Quietly. And perhaps that's why they're worth remembering. When we picture prehistoric life, we usually imagine the moments that demanded courage, the hunt, the escape, the fight. But human life wasn't built from extraordinary days alone. It was built from ordinary nights that ended safely enough for the next morning to arrive.